Good morning, everybody, for this meeting of the Town Geologic Safety Committee. First of all, I want to tell you that a number of us are here. Gary Ernst, Steve Ingebrigtsen, Nan Schustak, Bob Rucky, and myself. And we have Troy here as a future member who's not yet been approved as far as we know.
You should be.
We should be, but we don't know if it's happened. Mary Hufty, who normally would be here to represent as a liaison from the town council, she's off on vacation, so we won't see her today. So with this introduction, we can begin the meeting. Are there any comments or additions to the minutes? There are nobody with comments.
I move we approve the minutes as written, unless anyone has
Any comments? The minutes then are accepted.
Well, we have to vote.
Well, I thought we had voted.
no.
Oh, that's it.
Somebody seconded it? I did.
Yes.
Gary?
Yes, Bob.
Okay. All in
No,
favor?
with it.
Aye.
It's been accepted. At this point, the meeting is open to the public to comment on anything they would like to comment on that is not part of today's agenda. This is the usual practice in our town meetings. Do we know of any comments from anybody? If not, we will begin the meeting. We have a few items of old business. One of them is to remind everybody that we have a committee consisting of Gary Ernst, Nan, and Bob to study the evacuation plan and comment on it from our committee, and we will eventually have such comments. We're going to discuss that in our new business. There's also another item of old business that Nan wants to mention.
Yeah, on the agenda. The town council in June 24th, I think it was, approved our budget. We actually have some money for this fiscal year. We submitted a budget for $3,900 for various projects, and it was approved. So for the first time, Geologic Safety Committee has money. I was really pleased about that.
Yeah, what was the dollar amount?
$3,900. Which is what we requested, full amount. Okay. Now there's some reports on committee meetings. May I go ahead, Chat? This is
No,
item,
this is just old business.
old
right now.
business, yeah.
Only
still
old business.
Okay. So Chet and Bob and I attended the Emergency Preparedness Committee meeting on June 13th when they were unveiling the draft of the evacuation plan. And we had just a couple of days to look at it. And so we didn't have specific comments, but we did say that we were very much in favor of getting the plan out to the public as soon as possible because we're in fire season now. And we noticed that there was a hole in it, and that was they hadn't considered the nightmare scenario of earthquake plus wildfire. They were just looking at evacuation after wildfire. So we told them we'd be happy to work with them to add something for earthquake plus fire to the plan. And that they accepted our offer. And so we are going to review today the proposed chapter, which is not finished, but just want to discuss it today. They put a placeholder in their revised version, which they call Rev 1 of the plan, for our submission. And it will be either a chapter in the evacuation plan, new chapter, or an appendix. Either way, it should be there. Okay, after that, okay, I have more. After that, on July 6th, they discussed the plan. They wanted to get it to the town council to get it approved. And Craig Taylor said, well, the best way to expedite this is to is for him to write a colleagues memo to the council, and then but Jeff, you're the other person on the subcommittee with Craig, right, for the evacuation plan? Okay, so the town council's formed a two-person subcommittee, Craig Taylor and Jeff Alves, to review the plan and bring it to the council. So my point is, now is the time. If you have any comments about the evacuation plan, get them in to Jeff, to you and Craig, question mark, or to the authors. If people have comments, I know there were some comments from this committee.
This would be
To the
mostly
office.
new business.
No, this is still old business. Yeah, it is. It is. It is definitely old. Because it's a follow-on to our offer to write the chapter. So if anyone has comments, get them into the Rob Young, Randy True, Dale Fowl, who are the authors of the. Okay, that's it.
I failed to state that I've asked Nan to take care of minutes for this meeting, but she's going to be gone. Bob will help by recording this meeting. So Nan will be in charge of the minutes for the next meeting. It's now time for new business, if there's no further old business. And both Nan and Bob have things they want to talk about for new business. So I will begin with asking Nan to report on what is on her mind.
Okay, so this is the geologic, we're calling geologic hazards chapter for the town's evacuation plan. And it's the document that envisions the scenario of earthquake, damaging earthquake in town, plus wildfire and having to evacuate. So let's see, comments first from the public. How does that go? Not sure.
No, it's not time for comments.
Not
We
sure.
need to conduct our own first, our
We
own new business
present-
first.
No, this is new business, yeah, but we're on the new business item and it can have its own comments. Are there any comments? I'll just see if I can wing it. Comments from the public before we start discussion or,
We do it after we have our discussion on new business.
okay, then we'll have comments.
Please.
That's fine. Okay, so we have this proposed chapter. Oh. And I wanted to hand out. Troy, would you? Thank you. Okay. So I have a slightly revised version of the earlier version that is in the agenda. And this version will be in the minutes for the next meeting. Okay, for this meeting's the minutes that'll be available for the next
Good.
meeting. Okay. Okay, so we, at the, what's it, is it the last meeting? No, in June. At our June meeting, July. Anyway, we formed a subcommittee of 3 people to work on this document. So it's Bob and Gary and I in the subcommittee. And we've met twice. We met once with Rob Young from the Emergency Preparedness Committee. So we've got cross communication going. And so they know pretty much what we're doing. And after that, Bob wrote an outline, and which was a pretty detailed outline of this document. And then I've revised it since. Gary has added some revisions too. So this is a work product of from the 3 of us. And I'd like Bob to lead us through the document.
Okay. Thank you, Nan. part of what our subcommittee has talked about for adding is that should an earthquake, well, normally earthquakes don't start fires. Earthquakes damage things that people build that start to burn, and that starts the fire. And normally earthquakes don't require towns by themselves to be evacuated, but obviously if a water system is out, like what happened in Maui just recently, and what happened in San Francisco in 1906, if there's a fire that gets started, it can easily get out of control. A big problem that we see in our subcommittee is our roads. There are many examples, which I will maybe talk a little bit about, but just to make the main point, if there's an earthquake, there will be damage probably to our roads, and that will impact the options that people have to evacuate. So the town is putting together the emergency preparedness committee, is putting together an evacuation plan, but that plan talks about how to get everybody out of the town. But there are many problems that could happen if there was an earthquake associated with that need. And there's places where the faults cross the road. There could be landslides. I'm just going over a few examples. And another concern is bridges. Now, we're not engineers, and we're not trying to certify or claim that the bridges are a hazard or about to fall apart. I'm not here to make one statement one way or the other, but bridges, we all hope that they'll survive just fine in an earthquake. But I think it's prudent for everybody to know that, hey, there's a bridge here and there's a bridge there. And if there is a problem, that also could be something that will impact how people can evacuate. And to keep the meeting short, there's a part on the very back page, which we think that there's going to be a need for some kind of way to do some kind of emergency response to the roads, just to help make the roads passable. There are several different ideas. We as a Geologic Safety Committee do not claim to be experts on road repair. So we hope that the people who know what they're doing will take the ball and figure out how to do that. But there are different ways to, I'll give one example of a simple way to repair roads. There was a pile of gray rock in the town, as an example, a pile of the plastic equivalent of burlap sacks, like we have a place in the town to make sandbags. Well, sand's not a very good material for repairing roads, but something like crushed gray rock is. And if you just fill a bunch of sandbags or burlap bags with gray rock and put it in people's trunks. This is just an example. I'm not claiming that this is the right solution or even a good solution. I'm just giving an example of a simple solution. You can put crushed gray rocks in bags, put them in people's trunks. You can go to a place in the road where it's been badly damaged by an earthquake, pour the gray rock on the road, and maybe there's a chance that you can make the road drivable, because today's modern cars are often very low to the ground, and the slightest disruption to the asphalt could make a road undrivable by people. And even if somebody has to slow to just crawl to get over a bad spot because of a problem, because of a fault crossing a road, it's going to back up traffic for everybody. So maybe I've been talking too much about how to repair roads and things, but that is repairing roads is a big theme of what we recognize needs to be included in the evacuation plan, because earthquakes can cause that problem. That's my summary of the main points that are in this rough draft that we're working on.
Okay. Thank you. Good summary.
I'd like to comment a bit.
Yeah. Oh,
about-
okay.
In a usual earthquake, not a severe one that where we could imagine the very worst things happening, but in a more or less normal earthquake, if there is such a thing, only a few people will probably want to leave the town. We don't anticipate any big evacuation if there is no fire resulting from the earthquake, and of course there could be. But if there is not, we are mostly going to just have to help ourselves one way or another. Houses can be shaken up and damaged. People may not want to leave them. There may have to be local people to come out and help turn off gas and electricity so that the people who remain will be relatively safe. Our town SERP committee has worked on these kinds of problems in the past and has identified what likely is going to happen is that we will all have to help ourselves one way or another. And so we must think about being so prepared. Whether there are still neighborhood people who are willing to help, we don't know, but we have to hope that that would be the case, that we would all help. We have a little neighborhood where Bob and I live, and we know that we could help everybody in our little neighborhood one way or another and get people in the neighborhood to help others. And this is more or less what is likely to happen in an earthquake. So, are there further comments? Nan?
Yeah, two things. Yeah, absolutely, Chet. That is the most likely scenario for an earthquake. And we'd like to pursue that in another document. For the present purpose, we're just considering the evacuation plan after fire, earthquake plus fire. But the wider problem is very interesting and deserves more thought and discussion. What to do after an earthquake. Couple of things. Let's see. Yeah, in this document, if you go to page 2, well, it starts scenario earthquake. It starts at the bottom of page 1. I would like to open the discussion to the committee about exactly which scenario earthquakes we're considering. I'd like to discuss it with committee because I think it's worthwhile getting everyone's input into this. There are 3 pardon? Go ahead. Okay, 3 possibilities. One, 1906 style earthquake, which was regionally damaging. The rupture was throughout Northern California from near Mendocino, Cape Mendocino, down to San Luis Obispo. Portola Valley happened to be on the route, and the earthquake just tore through here, and it tore up the roads. So that's the point of here. And fortunately, there were dirt roads, pretty much dirt roads at the time, and it was fairly more or less easy to repair them. We have paved roads now, and the asphalt buckles and cracks, and you get whole chunks rising up or get voids. And it's much more difficult to repair them quickly, to Bob's point. We need to be able to repair the roads quickly. Anyway, so 1906 was huge. And as far as the roads go, that earthquake and the second on the list, 1838 type, no one knows about the 1838 earthquake, but it ruptured, it's thought to have ruptured most of the peninsula. And it was larger than the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989, but smaller than 1906. That also would have disrupted the roads here. The third type, so that's sort of the intermediate scenario, and then the small earthquake, if you will, is a Loma Prieta type earthquake on this segment of the fault right here through Portola Valley. In 1989, the earthquake did not rupture up to here. It stopped about Page Mill Road, south of here. We know that the section of the fault, San Andreas Fault, we're on right now is locked. There have been no even medium-sized earthquakes since 1906. And we are basically due for one, maybe not a 1906 size earthquake, maybe an 1838 size, the intermediate size. So for the purpose of this report, if we choose just one rupture, we can choose the largest and say, okay, here's the maximum damage. Here are all the places. We're planning to make a map that's going to show potential areas of potential rupture. So for 1906, we can show everything. For 1838, we can show less road damage, the potential road damage. And for the 1989, I'm not sure. I think actually that the 1838, 1989 ruptures would produce damage in similar places, but 1906 is likely to create damage in places that no one really has expected for 100 years. Okay, so I'd like to get people's opinions. Gary? Oh, speak into the microphone.
I think it's really important that
Pull it toward you. Pull the whole thing toward you. There you go. Okay.
okay, can you hear me?
No,
Okay. No?
there,
There you
yeah.
go. The purpose of this report, I think, is that we want to alert the townspeople, all our charges, that there's serious things that they have to prepare for. So it seems to me we're obliged to talk about what a major earthquake would do, like the 1906 earthquake. We have to first get their attention before we're going to get meaningful preparation. This may never happen in our lifetime. Let's hope it doesn't. But if it does, who wants to say, well, you know, we were preparing for a Loma Prieta? No. We got to prepare for 1906 or equivalent. So it seems to me our first job is to say, you know what, the probability is low, but the devastation is remarkably high. So prepare for the worst and hope is good, but it doesn't solve problems. And hope that we don't ever have. But we have to get people's attention. That's why it's really critical to deal with the worst possible scenario we can imagine that we could live with. There's some things we can do. It's an earthquake such as hit Japan. There's no amount of preparation from that make us safe for them. We have an obligation to the people who are our charges that we alert them to this. And I think what Bob Mann said about the roads is really critical, because ingress as well as egress is critical, because those that are going to be helping us, the fire department and others, need ingress as well as egress. So that's very important. In terms of resilience, what we do about sheltering in place is something we should call attention to, but it's far bigger problem in terms of social involvement than just our geology group. So we need to call attention to the resilience so that most people can shelter in place after an event. But we really need help with others, because we're simple geologists. You know, I mean, we can't even necessarily talk structural damage. How bad can it be, and we still are sheltering in place for individual domiciles and stuff like that. So we're going to need help with other people. But what we do know is egress and ingress has to be on the ground. That's us. So we definitely have to be very strong about alerting everybody to the nature of those problems. And Bob and you have both talked about them very effectively. That much is really important. The clarion call to get yourself ready. I'm not ready. You ready? Now, most of us are only partly ready. I'll have to look and see where we have all our go bags and stuff.
Oh. We have go bags and it'd be nice to be able to go if we need to.
Yeah, yeah. We need to be able to go if we have to go. Let's hope we don't have to go. We can stay where we are. Anyway, I do think we have to talk about that 1906 type earthquake. I don't know how you all feel, but all these others are nice, but they're not as electrifying as the danger.
I'd like to think that your comment that we need to plan for the 1906 earthquake is the right answer. As far as mentioning or even having a recognition of the other two earthquakes, Loma Prieta or the 1838, the value of those earthquakes is to remind us that we're not just waiting for 1906 to occur. If an earthquake happened and a surface rupture or the epicenter was in this town, our feelings about, for those who experienced and witnessed the Loma Prieta, for here it was not a big deal. It was far enough away and everything was pretty much fine. But if it happened right underneath our town, which it could, we would have a different memory. What happened in 1838 is an earthquake that most people don't know about, and it did most likely happen in Portola Valley. And it's just that in 1838 there wasn't much good record keeping. So we don't, that they are reminders that things can happen more frequently that can be just as alarming. Obviously, the 1906 would be the most alarming, but our current subcommittee has been tasked to try to write a chapter or a section for the town evacuation plan. The town evacuation plan is written mostly to deal with wildfire. That's the big model for why would we need to evacuate the town. The process of trying to put thoughts together for that chapter has brought, at least for myself, the recognition that there really needs to be, what I'm going to characterize as two more documents. One is, the first document is to deal with what is being asked of us for the town evacuation plan. But there's also a need to figure out what do people need to know if you just want to stay in the town and live and expect to recognize what life will probably be like in the days, weeks, and months after the earthquake, assuming that we don't have to leave and assuming we don't have a fire. There's things that people ought to know, that because life is going to be different for quite a while when we try to rebuild. And that's, I think we can help there. And to reinforce what you said earlier, Gary, I think feedback from other committees would be very valuable.
Yeah, I disagree with, I don't disagree with anything either of you said, but this discussion of scenario earthquake reminds me of the big trenching effort at Town Center a couple times over the last decade. What did they reveal about that? I mean, the intent was to look for pre-1906 ruptures, right? And I don't really recall what those trenches found, but they might inform.
I can answer that.
We know.
They did find the 1906 trace. They did not find any evidence directly attributable to 1838. But the fact that they didn't find it, the authors of those reports admitted that that doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
So 1906 was kind of the only major rupture they found in there?
They found others. They found others in the past.
Older?
Yeah. I'd have to go in and read more details to whom this.
So there are at least two traces. One is in front of us, the other is in back of us. And the 1906 rupture was in back of us, but they found evidence of older earthquakes on the trace in front of us. Now the 1938 that no one knows about, we haven't seen here, we haven't found here, but Tim Hall found it at Filoli. And who was it? Ashley Scribe found it at Hazel Dell, farther south. It was farther south, it was north of us, so we have to assume that it was here too, and we just haven't found it yet.
As far as I know, there's none of the trenching in this town has even found the evidence we believe should be there for the Black Mountain fault that was mentioned in the 1919 report. Is that right?
1908 Lawson report, right. Pardon? Lawson report.
The Lawson report, yes. So we can't rely on trenches to tell us everything. I think that we can do a lot, and even in our committee, to let the public know what's likely to happen.
Well, I'd like to give a preview of a thing about the 1838. It's interesting that we're talking about it because it's rather a minor part of the assignment is to try to figure out how to plan for the big one. But yet we're talking right now about 1838. Very little is documented about it. I've spent a great deal of time trying to learn everything I can about it. A lot of people have tried to figure out, well, what evidence does there exist? Lots of trenches have been dug looking for it. We've had trenches back here in the town and they didn't quite find it. As Dad, as you said, they found some evidence of it in Filoli and they found it beyond 17 near Watsonville. You put those two dots together, it had to have gone through this town. Yet there were other trenches that were dug looking for it and they didn't find it there. One place where they did find it, they had to dig for it 3 times before they found the evidence. So what this really shows is that, yes, trenching is considered a gold standard in the toolkit to understand what are the geologic hazards. And when you see that something is a gold standard, at least my opinion, I'd like to get feedback from the rest of the members of the committee. So when you have a gold standard and it's expensive to do, there's an expectation, reasonable, that you're going to get really good gold standard results. But the evidence is pretty clear that that is not what happens. Just trying to figure out what happened in 1838 has caused a lot of, it's not just a question of did it happen, the historical evidence of where people have documented that, yes, they experienced it in San Francisco, they experienced it in Woodside, they experienced it in Monterey. I think we experienced shaking in San Juan Bautista. That says that there clearly was an earthquake. And the question is, well, where was it? How powerful was it? And then the next question is, well, show us the evidence. Well, we find some, but what it also shows that the earth around here is very hard to give up its secret. Rather annoying because people are trying. There's enough about that. I mentioned earlier that there's a need for 3 documents, and I talked about a document to talk about what people ought to know in order to stay in the town. And I think it should be written in a way that it's written for the people. I also recognize that in the process of trying to prepare a document like that, that there's needs of information that needs to go to the town staff, the town council, different committees. And I think that that probably is best handled by collating that into a 3rd document that's just sort of like communication to the town and to help with suggestions, policies, questions. But we're at the beginning of this process. If there's many questions raised, there'll probably some policy suggestions made, and there'll have to be some way of communicating that back and forth as we go forward. I don't think the public want to get a copy of those documents, and of course they'll be public and it'll be freely available. I think really the public just wants to know, well, what do I need to do? Not be bothered with all the rest of it. So that's why maybe having separate.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the present document. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, thank you, everyone. The comments. So is it the consensus of the committee that we should, on the map that's going to be in the final document for the chapter in the evacuation plan, show basically all possible places that we know of where the road could be damaged in a 1906 sized earthquake? Huh?
Trying to get out. You want to know where the possible bad spots are that you might be stopped. You aren't going to get all of them, even if you do the best you can. But I think that at least people need to know, be careful of
these particular spots because there could be offset there that make it difficult, if not impossible, to get by. That's why it's really important to have a group of professional people, and I always refer to the CBs. That's those people, engineers who are fighting in the combat zone to repair things. They're trying to repair as fast as possible the egress, ingress routes. Down trees, impassable bridges, or just plain offset. So those people are going to be really important because if it is a big earthquake, there will be those situations. That means everybody gets to wait. Let's hope there's no fire then.
Yeah, hope there's no fire. Steve, what do you think about the scenario? What do we?
Please.
Yeah, okay, Ellen. Is that on?
The microphones are working.
Okay.
Okay. Well, my name's Ellen Vernazza, and one thing that's been left out of here are the telephone poles. So I, in my younger years, was a telephone installer out in Portola Valley. So I've climbed a lot of these poles. A lot of these poles are old. They're going to snap. After the Paradise fire, I was in contact with the planner for Paradise, and I asked her what did you not plan for evacuation? And her first thing was the telephone poles that went down. So if you drive down either Alpine Road or Portola Road, you can see all the cross wires crossing the road. And if they're going from one pole to another, so if there's a bad earthquake and this pole over here is ready to snap or really swinging back and forth, it's going to either pull the pole over here onto the ground, or it's going to pull all the wires off the pole, including electrical, which would be hot still, onto the ground. So I think we really have to, and first off, who's going to be moving these telephone poles off of the evacuation route? It's not like you just get 5 people out there and move a telephone pole. Those poles go, I mean, I think the phone wires are just 24 feet up, and the PG&E wires are at least another 15 feet up or something. So these poles are tall. They're going to cross the road. It's going to block everything, and much less it's a chain reaction. Those wires are up there tight at this point. So they could easily, when one pole falls, it can affect the next pole in line. So nothing is ever addressed about these. I've heard it mentioned, well, I've mentioned it before, in all honesty, not in this group, but in the fire group. So I think that really has to be addressed in an earthquake, because in an earthquake, it really could be, phone poles could really be affected on the evacuation route. Thanks.
Okay. Well, if I may just respond, come on up to Ellen. Absolutely. We talked about fallen trees. We should add telephone poles. And I think we have wire. Well, if we don't have wires, we will add them. One thing that occurs to me is that if PG&E doesn't automatically shut off power for an earthquake of the magnitude we're talking about, it should. And I would like to know whether that's going to be automatic. Can we safely drive across the wires that are across? No, even if they shut it off? Yeah. So I would like to know that they're going to shut it off. So we need to.
They did shut it off in 1989. At least the campus was off, and
Did they shut it off immediately?
couldn't tell. I was at the university. I got it. We won't drive on Alpine. Oh, that's right. That's only one of 2 roads you can drive. And I worry about that every day when I go down. Look at those wires, say, please, God, don't let them come down while I'm driving over them.
So Ellen, I want to thank you for raising the point, and I want to react to it, because I think that I mentioned earlier about having a report for the town evacuation plan, which is really focusing on wildfires, but then there's also should be a report or recommendations for how to live and shelter in place in the town after an earthquake. I mean, we don't have to evacuate. And even then, what you just raised is very valuable. So I think whatever we write for the evacuation plan ought to probably be included in a bigger document. And to me, what I've recognized that telephone poles and power lines are really important. And what amazes me is the percentage of this town where people who live on cul-de-sacs or live in a neighborhood where everybody has to funnel into a single road. One example, not to pick on them, but just to give an example, is Santa Maria. Lots of people all have to go live on different roads up the hill. They all have to get to on Santa Maria to get out. And that's an example. There are others. So even if we don't have a fire and we don't have to evacuate, we have to deal with these power lines that are going across our roads. What is the point? I don't know. What is the protocol to how to deal with that? What's going to happen? In 1906, I'm assuming that 1906, unlike Loma Prieta was relatively small. It's what it was 6.8. San Francisco is 7.8. Now that doesn't mean that it was 20% bigger. It was 32, roughly 32 times bigger, logarithmic scale. So I don't know how our entire peninsula is going to survive. And when will PG&E have time to come out to Little Portola Valley to take care of the wires across our roads, especially when so many of our people might be blocked because it's kind of a random thing. What roads are going to get blocked by these power lines and which roads are not? Especially considering how an amazing percentage of our residents are on routes where there's only one way out.
Karen?
This is why it seems to me we must be prepared to take care of ourselves as best we can. We can't rely on PG&E helping us. They're going to be, they'll help us as they can, but they're going to be super busy. The same thing for the fire department. Everybody, every emergency group is going to be up to its head in trying to take care of everything. So the people of this town need to know that they need to be able to take care of themselves in one way or another, either as an individual family or as a group of people in a particular area like Santa Maria, which Bob just mentioned. They must be aware themselves of how to help them each other. It's going to be really important, it seems to me, in a 1906 type earthquake, where the shaking in this town can probably be severe and many houses are going to be damaged. It doesn't mean they have to be evacuated, but there are going to be problems and we must learn how to take care of them. We must make the town be aware that it must somehow take care of itself.
Okay, Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen Batra. I have a bunch of they're all a little unrelated. They're all related to this topic, but they're kind of separate points that I'd like to bring up. And I don't have answers to them, but I just think they're relevant.
Okay,
Bert-
speak directly.
Am I not close enough? I'm like right on it.
No.
Okay. First on the power lines, we just have to leave that to PG&E, unfortunately. You can't be that close to a power line. So I do totally applaud neighbors helping each other, but not around the power line. So every other thing is fine. So I think I would just be very cautious that if you see in any case, power line on the road, you just have to stay at least 10 feet away from it and wait for the experts to take care of that. I just think that's an important point. Okay, so other points. Can we use the data from Loma Prieta in other towns, like how many roads were actually broken? Then we can somehow, kind of gauge like, well, wherever the actual fault was in Santa Cruz, Highway 17 was cracked or this other main route was cracked. That we can, somehow get some historical data so that we can estimate, well, okay, Portola Road, how much damage might happen so that we can get an estimate on it. Is there statistics out there from Loma Prieta or other things? I don't know myself, but I do remember Loma Prieta, and I think many of us probably do. I do not live here in town. So that's one suggestion. Another question is about your fault map. I know we have a lot of different faults that, are historical from perhaps way, way back when. And is there an expectation that if we had a big earthquake, all of those different locations would be road damaged, or would just one be damaged, or perhaps two? So I think that might be helpful for the public, that if we did have a big earthquake, that we don't expect that all of these different spots are simultaneously going to be broken. And however you could convey that in the actual map, it would just be helpful to not be, too alarmist in that respect. I think bringing up this question about road repair is an excellent point. And can we do anything at a town level? Is it realistic to have big rocks that a car could drive over? Is it realistic to have the steel? I don't know. And perhaps it might be good use of resources to get a road repair contractor to this group or to the town council or some other study session with the EPC to see if there is a viable fix. I don't think there, or maybe there's somebody in town that does that professionally, but I don't think us kind of guessing. I mean, bringing up the question is excellent, but I don't think that any of us know that. And I think that getting that expertise would solve the question much faster than any more exploration on that. I have a lot of different ideas all the time. Another one is the bridges. Most of them are kind of local, or, I'm thinking of the one on Grove that actually nobody drives on it because it's closed, but it is emergency evacuation route. Do we have a formal status on those when they were ever evaluated? I remember back in the 70s or the 80s that the government went through and kind of evaluated the roads for seismic safety. Maybe my memory's false, but do we at least know the age of the bridges and kind of something general, so we can kind of either put a caution mark on them or a question mark, or just eliminate that as actually non-issue? Can we get the historical data on that? And my last point, or last question point would be, this came up when I was on the wildfire committee about alternative evacuation routes through private property. And that didn't get explored too much. Just sort of thoughts on that. Perhaps there's some, going through the Neely properties, or, it's just something different. Is there a way somehow, or through the Web Ranch, or some other way that we can get at least out of town, or the road that nobody ever, that's private property. And I want to expand that to even, let's say Portola or Alpine is closed. How hard would it be to make some sort of dirt road temporary through private property in a major situation so people can evacuate quicker? I might be through a Rastadera Preserve or something. And then, and just asking that question, maybe through the Hawthorns, wherever. I'm just throwing totally wacky ideas out there, but I'm just thinking of like in Maui or in a situation like that, if you've got a 4-wheel drive, some Jeep, which I do not have, but let's say you did, you might just go through somebody's private property to save your life, and I don't know how we ask that question or analyze that, but are there alternative dirt paths that we can quickly get to? So that's all my thoughts. Thank you.
I'd like to address your questions.
No, I've got some responses to it, so you go first.
Okay. As far as, thank you for the comment about don't trust the power lines being dead. It's a very one-way mistake that if you guess wrong. Other faults. Yes, the other faults in this town will move in the 1906, because we know that because it happened in 1906. The other faults are not as well mapped and they're not as well known. Working on that. It's going to be very surprising. I've been going through the archives personally, trying to find what can we know about the other faults. And yeah, our town map is not really addressing everything. It does not have all of the hazards. There has to be a process of peer review to see, well, okay, if the archives say that there's something here and you write up a report, you need to be able to, not just because the author wrote the report, you need to have other people look at the report, have it peer reviewed and see. And then are the people who do the peer reviewing, are those people that you really want to endorse the report? It's not, in my opinion, it's not who wrote the report, it's the package. Who wrote it and who endorsed it. That gives credibility as to whether. So as an example of why would we know that other faults moved? Well, in Woodside, the biggest offset in 1906 was in Olima, which is near Tomales Bay, it was about 20 feet, if I recall. And in the town of Woodside, there are documentation of fence being offset 8 feet. Locally here, it varied, but it could be as little as 2 feet or 4 feet. Well, what was happening in Portola Valley? The fault was not just ending because it went all the way to San Juan Batista. What can happen is that you have a little bit of happening on the main fault, but you also have movement on the secondary faults, which is why you don't have to have the main fault say move 8 feet. There's movement elsewhere. There's lots of hints about this in the Lawson report, not fully understood, but that's an example to answer your question. Yes, it's not just one fault, it can be others. And we may not know all of the others. There's
That's an important point. There could be new breaks that you can't anticipate right now.
you were asking about going on private property. That's something that I know will be on our minds because I recognize that there are paths and places where there are roads where locally somebody may need to use. I mean, if you have a road that's blocked even on 2 ends, but the only exit is somebody's private road, everybody on that road that's blocked will want to use that private person's road because that's the only thing that's left. So, and just being able to identify these places is something that I think that we could do in a map, and then whether there will be the cooperation and all the details about how to deal with the private road. As a person understanding geology, I don't understand the legal stuff. Somebody else is going to have to help with that. It takes cooperation. But well, anyway, thank you for asking the questions. I hope I've given you some answers.
Okay, thank you. Good response. Okay, a couple of things. For the 1989 earthquake, whether that can be used as a model here, or data can be used. It didn't rupture the surface. It wasn't actually on the San Andreas fault. It was on a fault that in the San Andreas system, one of these secondary faults that Bob was talking about, and it never ruptured the San Andreas itself at the surface. So the road, most of the road problems from 1989 were from landslides, and yes, we can get data for that. But road ruptures, road places where the road's been offset, some of those were on the secondary faults. And that's why we're concerned about the secondary faults here. So yeah, to that extent, we can use it as a model. Let's see, and on the road repair, I would like to turn to the last page, page 6 of the proposed document. And we've got 2 ideas here. We say, what can Portola Valley do to ensure safe evacuation after an earthquake? One thing is to prepare ahead of time and to do a study of the roads and bridges, a vulnerability study, or you can look at it as seismic resilience or vulnerability, depending on whether you think the glass is half full or half empty. And document the state of the roads and bridges and try to get funding from the county, from the state, federal government to effect the repairs that need to be done to bring them up to earthquakes safety standards before the earthquake happens. So at least we won't have the problems we know about to worry about. And the second thing is Gary had the idea of this rapid road repair crew. He compares them to CVs who just get in, get the job done. We have 4 ideas. One is Bob's sandbags with gravel, rock, to fill the voids. And when we talk about voids, and on Alpine Road, just past Dana Breen's house, where the fault crosses Alpine Road, San Andreas fault crosses, there's a place where there were cracks several feet wide and deep. And there was an offset of between 1.5 feet and 2 feet, depending on where you are in the road. There's no way that a car could get across. The cars couldn't get across in 1906. Trucks couldn't get across until the road had been repaired, and we would never get cars across there now. Okay. So the sandbags is one idea. Heavy steel plates. This was Bob's idea too, for bridging these places. Maybe we could bridge them. I don't think plywood's going to do it, but maybe there's a way to do it. Earth moving equipment at the town center. I don't know how heavy it would have to be, like one of the big loader or tractor with a scoop, dirt moving scoop, or a truck with a scoop on the front. You have to be able to scoop up asphalt and move it, chunks of asphalt. And then this rapid response road repair team. And I keep thinking about the volunteers who come out in the middle of the night and clear the roads of downed trees and storms. So we have a group of people already in town who do that. They could be trained to evaluate the roads after an earthquake. They could just automatically go out and check for trouble spots and either repair them or alert whoever the next level up is that there's a problem and we need help now. I don't want to put a lot of responsibility on them, but it occurred to me that the infrastructure we have in town, well, they're basically the only infrastructure for quick response on the roads we have right now, as far as I know. Jeff, am I right? Or is there some other resource? Yeah, but I'm talking about middle of the night in the road in the middle of the night. Yeah. Yeah, the next step is to talk to Howard and pass some of the ideas by him, and maybe he has some better ideas. But before we come in. Okay, so and you said the county. Yeah. That's right. But yeah, so if there's a large earthquake, that's a problem. We're sort of, what, 4,500 people or whatever, sort of last on the list. There's not very many people. We're out here in the boonies, and there are higher priorities elsewhere in the county. We know that. Yeah, so you'd expect the fire district to be the first out to. Yeah,
Karen, you mentioned earlier of asking about statistics about what happened in get information that can be useful in Portola Valley. There's my expectation that in terms of providing things for like the immediate assignment, which is the town evacuation plan, there's a lot of information that can be added that cannot be done quickly. So I'm hoping that we can provide something that can be useful now, but I fully believe, I do not want to hold up everything to be, because, but I mean, like there's, I'll just give an example. I think that we know where the San Andreas Fault crosses Portola Road in 2 locations and where it crosses Alpine Road. There's historic photographs of that. I think that it would be, I'm guessing, I'm hoping that it works out, that you make like a double exposure or composite photograph showing the road today superimposed with the road in 1906. You can see where it is and what the damage was like in 1906. Yes, that's not going to be perfect because in 1906 there were dirt roads and not asphalt roads, and asphalt behaves different, breaks apart in big blocks. But anyway, nevertheless, despite the imperfections, I think that could be very useful information, which it's not statistical information, which is what you asked for, but I think it's very helpful information for the people of the town.
okay. Oh, well, one thing is that, they're being seismically upgraded right now. There's a 2019 report from Caltrans on this project, and they're seismically upgrading the Alpine Road overpasses, plural, and same on Sand Hill Road, and the same at 380 across 280, the 3 projects in the county. So with any luck, that will be fine. But if they're not, then yeah, we need to look at alternatives. Yeah, this comes under the category of non-traditional routes for evacuation. Yeah.
Well, just to follow up with your question, there's just information. There is a U.S. Geological Survey report that has been published about what was the damage of Loma Prieta here. And yes, there was damage at Page Mill Road, but there was also damage at Alpine Road and the bridge that you're talking about across San Francisco Creek. The soffits were damaged. Now, that was an earthquake where the earthquake was many miles away from here. Just imagine what would it have been like if not even a 1906 earthquake, but if Loma Prieta was here, not there, what would happen? Which, no, I'm really reinforcing your question, not answering the question, because yes, it could have been much worse. Thankfully, it wasn't. And if it is worse, and thankfully they are retrofitting and trying to make it better. But if things really get bad, what do we do? Because we definitely, as you point out, we all depend on either being able to use 280 or get across 280.
I'm not sure what the standards, but what they do is choose a level of shaking. well, basically acceleration they're using, and build to withstand that level of shaking. And I'm not sure exactly what they've chosen. You can correlate the degree of shaking, the acceleration or velocity of the shaking with a particular magnitude earthquake. And there are relationships there, but they build to the, for engineering purposes, they build to acceleration standards. No, we don't know. We could look at the report again, but I don't know I'm not sure they were that specific. We'd have to contact Caltrans. Yeah, that's a problem. I mean, I worry about those overpasses too. I think we all do.
To that, there's two ways to address the question, a very legitimate question. Thank you for raising it. Hopefully things are being engineered so it's going to work. But things that man makes don't often work, and we get surprised. I'm sure that there are going to be lessons learned in whatever big event happens in the future. I would like to know what's the plan B. Which is really so yes, we hope the bridges will hold, but then if they don't, and I'm not trying to claim that they won't, but just assume that the worst happens. Do we have a plan B? We would like to have one. And I don't know what that would be.
Well, I'm sorry. Say again. Repeat, please. I'm sorry.
Well, one thing
What- no,
I'll give a
okay.
comment. I think you're asking about plan B. What are the other options? One step that doesn't answer your question fully is to actually document, well, where are these other roads that might exist so that you can actually consider creating a plan B. And those can be mapped, plans to do that, but can't get that done like in the next few days. Yeah. Yeah. No, well,
Well, okay, Jeff, what do you think would happen in an emergency? I mean, real emergency. There's a fire at your back. Your only escape route is through the private property, and you know there's a road there. Okay, is there anywhere a document listing all of these possible places, or a map, or how many? Yeah. Okay. So if we're looking at our Portola Valley and the sphere of influence, and that includes Webb Ranch, then we could perhaps map this, an escape route through the underpass at Webb as an alternative to the Alpine Road or Sand Hill Road. Yeah, I understand they don't like the idea of an emergency evacuation route through Jasper Ridge, but if I were living on Escobar and that was the only way out, I would try to crash through the chain link fence. Yeah.
Jasper Ridge and a fire, because I think the fire department pretty much sees that as collateral damage. They're not going to defend that. They're going to defend our homes. So I think in an earthquake, Jasper Ridge might be a good alternative escape route, but in a wildfire, extremely cautious unless the wildfire is over in Hazel Road or something.
For a normal evacuation for which you have several hours to plan. Yeah, then,
I
no.
just want to put that caution, just in the wildfire, don't go into any area that's, open, because they're going to like, they're going to be more likely to protect the homes and the people, so think, just a word of caution.
Yeah, okay, good point, thank you. Yeah, we're in a sort of unique, well, not unique position. Woodside's in a similar situation. In which we will have an earthquake rupturing through town. It's going to happen sooner or later. And the roads will be disrupted. And it's likely, it's very, very common to have a fire. It doesn't always happen. Likely to have a fire. We could have one that starts in town. There will not be 3 or 4 hours for an orderly evacuation. And as I said, the roads are disrupted. It's sort of the worst possible case. And we have to think about that. It's not pretty. So are we going to, okay, so we're going to go with the 1906 scenario and map everything we know about that could, or where there could be a road disruption, a bridge disruption.
Discussion has indicated there's several real problems left. After an event, and it could have been the fire just as well as the earthquake because trees would come down. And what happened recently with the telephone. And so that also is a possibility there, but we also need to say that we need not only some sort of rapid response team, but an assessment of the terrain and how alternate routes might be passable when the major routes are still clogged or impacted. I know this work has already been done, but this is really kind of an important priority. We find other ways of getting out if it becomes necessary.
Okay. Thank you.
No, these are not conclusions. They are just questions that need to be answered for the future.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay, Jeff, thank you so much for coming. This is okay. Okay. Okay, if you turn to page 5, document, there's a map, and this is a placeholder. This is something we put together last year, this year, last year. Just showing where major problems might be on the evacuation route. So this is just the beginning. And there would be a lot more information on this. We'd have landslides, we'd have areas of liquefaction. We might have more fault crossings. And Bob, you had an idea of showing where you can the historical photographs where they
Yeah, there's
Where they-
photographs for the 3 places where San Andreas Fault crosses roads. And there's also historic maps and documents for the other places in the town. So
for which, I'm sorry.
The,
Was it?
well, the Barracal Fault and Black Mountain.
Yes,
there's
maps. Yeah,
documentation,
there's
there's
documentation.
documentation, but not photographs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of work still to be done, but
I've got a question. I assume from the legend that that all these smaller faults come off of the Brab and others quad map?
No,
No.
there are faults on this map that are not on geologic map, which is alarming because this is stuff that there's evidence from 1906 that's been ignored. And I'd like to actually have a conversation about that.
So where do these, I know, I understand this is just a placeholder, but where do these other faults come from?
Well, the Black Mountain Fault comes from the Lawson report, which is a diagonal thing that kind of goes in.
Unlabeled one there?
It's a diagonal that branches off from the San Andreas.
Uh-huh.
And then there is,
it's the one that isn't, it's the one that looks like a straight line instead of a squiggle.
then there's one that goes near the fire station and the gas station, and there's not Lawson report, but there are individual maps from 1906 that talk about surface rupture there.
They're from the people who
Photograph
actually,
of a bent pipe stuck out of the ground, which we think was taken near there.
and this documentation is from the geologist from Stanford who came out just after the earthquake to survey the damage here. And then most of those reports went into the Lawson report, which came out in 1908, the California report on the earthquake, 1906. But some of the material Bob and Chet have seen in the Stanford archives, and that's not published. But there are maps that show very clearly where the ground ruptured in 1906. And some of those places have not been captured on modern map.
I've got digital copies.
Okay, so the small faults come from the Lawson report and unpublished.
Maps, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? How are we doing? Been pretty good. Any other thoughts on the document, on the, just, looking at it broadly, on the content generally? What we're trying to do is to create something that is readable by normal people, not geologists. So we tried to keep things fairly simple, and I hope we hit the right tone and degree of
Hopefully,
detail.
maybe we're going to be soon to end the meeting, going on for a while, but I'd like to just summarize things. We have a subcommittee that's trying to put something together for the evacuation plan. We're going to try to get something that can be given to them soon, and then, but there's also more that could be added later, and hopefully they'll accept additions in the future. And, that's mostly of what this meeting has been. It's just been an expression of what's going on and what you can look forward to in the future.
So we know a lot about where there could be problems. It's difficult to figure out exactly how to solve some of the problems. Gary mentioned that there could be a lot of trees down. It would affect the evacuation of this town if there were a big need for an evacuation. You can dream up all kinds of really bad things. The problem is the response is not very evident. But what we could do about it rapidly. Get a whole bunch of trees crossing roads. There's nothing much that can be done immediately.
So the vegetation management plan is trying to trim the trees along the major evacuation.
That's helpful.
That's
We
helpful.
can make suggestions like that.
Well, the suggestion in the report is that we look at the roads and bridges to evaluate them for seismic safety. And this report would complement the traffic study that was done last year and the ongoing vegetation management plan. So I think the three of them go together, make a nice trio, if you will.
Yeah, actually pointing out all these problems that we've been talking about this morning would be a big step. It hasn't all been put together. And that's where we come in.
Yeah, and we hope we don't scare people to death in the process.
We can't solve all the problems, but we can certainly make people aware of what needs to be considered. Even if there is no immediate response possible. No further ideas, Bob?
It's been a good meeting. It's grateful to have this. It's been great to have this meeting to bring this information out.
Yes. Yes, and we need to work on the documentation, and that's where our subcommittee is coming in, and I thank Nan for all that she's done to put together the information that she gave us today. We'll have to just continue to work on all of these problems. That's our job. Are there any further responses to our problems?
No, I would just say that I guess the subcommittee will continue to work on the document and bring back the next version to the full committee. When we can.
That's good. And I know that Bob's very interested in all sorts of problems of what can happen in Portola Valley that has not been documented. Bob's got a lot of information that he will add to the committee's knowledge. Further thoughts on where we go from here? I think this committee has got a lot of work to do and it knows it, and I'm glad we have it. And I thank especially Nan for what she's put together.
Yeah.
And I thank Bob for all of his efforts to understand more about problems in Portola Valley and on the peninsula here that aren't well known. In fact, that are almost unknown.
Yeah.
I was unaware of the seismic retrofit on 280 down here, but I just thought as a citizen, that's really important information. And there is a 300-page Department of Transportation report online that's very mindable, but I decided not to try to read it on my phone.
Yeah,
You know, they talk about the vulnerabilities and the costs. They spent about 15 million
on the study so far,
on
On the-
actual work.
so far,
Yeah.
but they've hardly begun.
Is that right? I couldn't tell.
Well,
But
here
but
anyway.
that's something I want to read offline and find out
Yeah,
more about.
that would be great. Yeah, the study came out, that report came out in 2019, I believe. And it's, yeah, I know they're starting work here. I see a little bit of evidence at Sand Hill Road, and I haven't paid attention at the 380 overcrossing of 280 up in San Bruno. But
I've seen a lot of work going on Sand Hill, and I had no idea what it was, but now I assume it was part of this seismic retrofit.
hope so.
It may be just a prelude to it. I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of staging and planning they have to do before they actually start work.
So Steve, it seems as though you have knowledge of information that might help the committee, and I would hope you might share it with the committee, the subcommittee.
Me?
And you too.
About the seismic retrofits.
It seems as though a lot of people, those who came to this meeting today, all have lots of concerns, lots of ideas, need to be funneled to us, our subcommittee. So, and not just the subcommittee, but to all of us, so we can together eventually come up with some really important information, not just for the evacuation committee. That's important. I think we're probably pretty close to being able to give the evacuation committee some substantive information. But we have a long way to go beyond that. So we all have a big job ahead of us to keep our minds open and to talk with one another. I'm glad that we have a committee that's big enough so we can talk to one another. Let's do it. Further comments? Man? Steve?
Gary.
One thing I
Gary?
would say is that our committee has a great responsibility to show what the various geologic hazards are that
Yes.
upset our town. And the problem is to accommodate them, there are a lot of things we can do to minimize the adverse effect, but some things require expertise that we don't have, for repair and that sort of thing. How do we fix the corridor of Alpine? Other people, like PG&E has to do that. Really, we can't do that. We can only alert them to the fact that all these power lines will be down in a major earthquake. In the same way with the business of resilience, and sheltering in place. This is something that we really, as Chet talked about, especially, is something that we really need to know more about. But in fact, that other agencies, other groups have expertise that are needed here. We're not building these animals. We can't go out and tell them, okay, this one's safe and that one isn't. We know that all we have to do it individually if there are no building, the inspectors coming around. Where we are on stable ground, shall we say, is in describing the geologic hazards that we see here. And some of the reactions or things that have to be taken are far beyond it. So we can ask the town to consider them, like, for instance, other ways of egress and rapid response and sheltering in place and so forth. But they have to take a major role in this. I think we exceed our authority as simple geologists if we try to tell them who can stay in shelter in place and who can't. It's a concept that we have to live with, but somebody else has to have some expertise that exceeds ours, which is zero.
Well, that's right. We have to put out as much information as we can so that other people can take over. And I think that's your point, Gary. Thank you for it.
We've got to get everybody's attention.
That's right.
The first
And that's
thing.
going to be difficult. So we have a lot to do.
Okay, so to that point, and this is on the agenda, for next meeting, could we discuss, I'd like to discuss exactly this. What we think, given the geologic hazards, what we think the likely scenarios are. And we could suggest further action. I mean, we can suggest ideas for sheltering in place, for instance. And we can do that, but we have no way to enforce anything or put a program in place. But what we need to do is bring the problems and some ideas.
Well,
to-
yeah, we certainly put ideas, but it is not our main expertise. So we just have to be participants, alerting people to the need. Because as Bob said, Chet said, we're going to be on our own for a time. But really big one.
Yeah, but I'd like, okay, but for the next meeting, if everyone could read, or at least read quickly through this report from SPUR, it's the San Francisco Bay Area Planning and Urban Research Association. And they undertook a very large project about a little over a decade ago to, Steve, do you know about that?
No,
To define resilience, what resilience, especially seismic resilience, means for San Francisco. They were looking at basically the 1838 scenario, magnitude 7.2 on the peninsula, and described what it would be like in San Francisco and what would be needed to help people stay in their homes as long as possible until services could be restored. And, perhaps the home is damaged, but not so badly damaged that you can't stay there. Okay. And so this report is about that, safe enough to stay.
It's not very quantitative, other than how many days you're going to have to stay in your home in various scenarios. But it doesn't tell you how to determine what those dates are going to, what those time periods are going to be like. I look for that, how we really address this other than the fact, and we know how long we've had to stay in our home without water and whatever. Then we understand that's what the stage is at. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The problem is, the point is, it's very good at alerting people. You're going to have to deal with it. You're going to have to hold your breath a long time, really. And that's what but how they determine what the resilience is, namely the ability to stay in the place, is unclear because it's a very complicated problem.
Yeah.
There's many different variables associated with it. It isn't just the roof leaking. No, that's one aspect. It isn't all,
Yeah.
So it raises the concept, and it's very good. I think we are a little better off than they're talking about the city, which a lot of buildings are not up to grade. Triple walls were built. But we did learn. I learned some things from it. It still makes me feel. It raises the concept, but it doesn't tell me exactly what each one consists of, each stage. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know exactly what you mean. It's good as a planning document and the starting point, but then we have to extrapolate for Portola Valley for a particular situation. And, what would things be like here? Well, it would take more time to get, say, electricity back than it might in the city. But it, maybe less time for something else, because as you point out, the housing here is probably better able to withstand a certain degree of shaking than.
Some of the oldest unreinforced masonry
Ouch.
in the county.
Still?
Well, that was the first.
Yeah.
Most of that not been replaced.
Yeah.
But it's those are good documents to look at, but it's still, you won't know until we've been through it, what stages we're at.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good document to read just to get the thoughts running, and then we have to imagine what it would be like here. We'll have to coordinate with the fire district and see what they think.
Boy, you
So-
raised your hand. Do you have a comment? Speak up, please.
Can you hear me? I'm not clear. Okay. Alan Lentz said in response to a question from a reporter about the earthquake in the 1980s that killed thousands of people in Mexico City, he said that there's going to be an earthquake. It's not arguable. It will happen. It is inevitable. But that thousands of people will die is not at all inevitable, because that is a question of preparation. And preparation, to a great degree, I'm afraid, in Portola Valley is a question of communicating with the public the threats that we face and the preparations that they can individually make. And we now have an absolutely magnificent example of what can go wrong. It's called Lahaina. And there is photographic evidence that is just unbelievably scary. But there's also one photograph that I saw online that was quite revealing, I think. Completely surrounded by ash, as far as the photograph showed. There was one house untouched. And obviously the reason was it was prepared. It had a metal roof. It was essentially ember resistant. And here it is, pristine in the middle of total desolation. Now, this is a kind of communication, I think, that we can, the city, can use to communicate to our population the necessity for us to do things individually and on our own. That's one little thing. I have a question from PG&E fairly recently, maybe a year ago or so. PG&E put a new pole in the ground on the city's right-of-way next to my property. And the guys who put it there told me that it was a set of remote controlled switches controlled from an office in Chico, where they can shut down the power in my neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, yeah, thank you for that. That's really important. I'm sorry, I don't want to.
So the question I have is how much of the city of Portola Valley can be protected from falling poles, creating the danger that's pretty obvious, beyond just the Willowbrook Valley, which is all I know about. And that's something that I think the town ought to ask PG&E about, and what their plan would be in the case of an earthquake when there are lots of wires down. Do they have the ability, point one, and point two, under what conditions would they just turn off all the power around here to make an evacuation much more reasonable? Okay. Another issue, very personal to me, is that I own a road. Well, Harold Hunterfeld and I own the lower half, he owns the upper half, that was created post-Civil War by the Martinez family for access to the Willowbrook Valley that they called the vegetable garden. And it was a road that would allow them to use a horse-drawn wagon to haul produce, which they could grow in that valley, down to the market in Redwood City. And if there's any argument about when that road was created, it's on the Coast and Geodetic Survey map of 1895. And it's the only road other than Alpine and Portola Road that's on that map in Portola Valley. And it was economically important to the Martinez family because that was the best farmland in the land grant. And they needed wagon access to it, which nature didn't provide. So they cut a road traversing across the steep hill to go from Alpine Road down into the valley. I think everybody, oh, well, I should put it this way, all the children who've grown up on Willowbrook Drive know all about it because that's how they used to walk to Corte Madera School. But I'm not sure people think about it in terms of emergency exit, evacuation. If in the case of an earthquake, the other ends of Willowbrook are not available. And one thing that I would like to think about that I think is important to the Geological Committee is the availability of, or the fragility of utilities like water and gas for the post-earthquake period for people who choose not to evacuate. Now, San Francisco in 1906 had some very serious problems with water. And of course, in the Loma Prieta earthquake, they hadn't learned their lesson adequately. So they had to bring in a fireboat to pump water out of the bay to put out fires down in the Marina District. That simply is evidence to me of the fragility of the system. And I have no idea how badly, well, Loma Prieta obviously didn't seem to do much damage, but a 1906 earthquake might just shut down water in the city. And that would make life here pretty tough for people who chose not to evacuate.
Yeah, I'll address that last point. We have talked about this, about the, we call it fragility, the resilience or lack thereof of the utilities here. That's part of a discussion and maybe documents that we would like to produce, talking about the larger problem. Sheltering in place, there's, you know, the utilities are their own problem. We do know about that. But they're not specifically involved, except for the downed power lines and the poles in the evacuation problem. So that's, you know, that's still to come. And that is what you brought up is very, very important, because we're not going to have utilities for a long time.
Well, we have a lot to do. I think we can each make ourselves pretty unhappy with thinking of all the things that we personally need to take care of if there were a big emergency of the kinds that we've been talking about. And Gary is absolutely right. There's just a lot that we as individuals need to do to take care of ourselves. And we need to pass this information to the town so that everybody thinks about these kinds of things. I think it's going to be very difficult to get the people in the town to become aware of what they need to do, what they need to be prepared for. But we'll continue to try to not to scare them, but to shake them up, like the earthquake will shake us up anyway. We should be reminded that this particular building was shaken so badly in 1906 that it was knocked off its foundation.
Cripple wall, Gary.
Or at least it was put back, at least it survived well enough to be put back together on the foundation, and here we are today. There's just going to be lots of problems like that next time. So I thank everybody for coming and for producing all the information that has come out, and especially for the committee with Gary and Nan and Bob. And they have a lot of work to do, and we all must help them. So I think we will have plenty of information for the next meeting. We'll have to think about it and put it together. I think we've come a long way today. We've obviously brought people in who wanted to express their feelings toward us. I think that's been a very good thing. Excellent.
Yeah.
So let's just go and continue to work and see if we can't make progress. And I thank you, Nan, for your report. I think each of us need to read what you put together. I'm glad we have it. We'll go off and have a happy vacation. Thank you. So instead of making each of us unhappy with what we could do, let's go off and enjoy life a bit.
Good idea.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
There's a second.
Everybody seconded? I too. So the meeting is adjourned at what, about 8 minutes to 12?
7:46.
Thank you.
46.